All right, Steve Outtrim, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Good, thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me back.
And, well, we just had some technical difficulties that we were just able to overcome, thankfully. So, anyway, I appreciate your patience and taking care of that. And we're back to discuss Silicon Valley's secret weapon, the Shadow History of Burners, Part 2.
Great. So, what I tried to do in part 1 is, I guess, really explain to the audience a bit of a foundation or background of Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley has primarily come from the military. That's how it got its start. That's where a lot of the funding came from. That drew in the venture capital industry, which was quite small and insignificant in the beginning. And then after purely defense contracting, what happened was a shift towards consumer electronics devices, and then computers, consumer electronics, iPods, cell phones, the modern world that we live in today. And I think where we kind of got up to was, around about where I want to pick up today, sort of the after the 60s, sort of the mid to late 70s, going through to sort of the mid to late 1980s. And specifically what happened in 1986, which is a number of remarkable things occurred in that year. And one of them is the birth of Burning Man. And another one that's quite remarkable is the birth of the internet, certainly the modern internet as we know it. And when you look at history on a timeline and you look at these things that may appear to be at first unrelated, Burning Man and the internet, look at the timeline and you see how things happen and what else was going on at the same time, and some incredible things come up. So we may need to get that coincidence meter going again, Jan. I think we're probably going to come across some more coincidences this evening.
Whichever side it pops up on, I forget now. It'll be on one of those sides.
Okay, and so shall we go into screen sharing now?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay.
All right, so we're all set to go there.
Okay, so let's start with another quote from Mark Twain, great Bohemian Grover. He said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And I think that's something that we probably run into quite a lot on social media.
Oh, wow. Well, just in general, I think, you're familiar with it. We do all of this research. We try to expose something, and, people will ridicule you before they even look at the research. And it's absolutely true. It's easier to fool someone than it is to get them to realize that they've been fooled.
Yeah, and especially if they are fools. I have to say for myself that the sort of topics that we're talking about here, I've been fooled by them. I've been taken in by them, and
absolutely.
It's only after doing a lot of critical thinking, doing my own research, and catching out authority figures and some really quite blatant lies. That I started to realize, well, okay, hang on, don't believe everything you're told, verify it for yourself. And then once you go down that path, it's quite a long journey of verification to learn things, and for a while you might start to wonder, well, what's true and what isn't, and is there anything to believe in? But I still believe that we live in a world that's basically good, and that most people are basically good, but we're also inside this system of control, as has been described by Huxley and others, and it seems like the system has been very deliberately engineered to contain and control us, and I think in a lot of ways to hold us down, and I really would like to see To use a cliched phrase from the 60s and the 70s, human potential. That's what these guys were selling, human potential. And humans do have a lot of potential. And the best way for us to realize that potential, I think, is to come together and to focus on the truth and to help out those around us who have been tricked and who have been fooled and do have the blinkers on.
Absolutely correct.
So just on this slide that we have up here, so this is a picture of San Francisco, obviously from the air, and we're looking back towards the south. So the famous Golden Gate Bridge is there to the bottom left, and this whole bay was really absolute heaven for pirates. It actually, people had been sailing past it for 100 years or more, and had no idea there was even a bay here. It's quite difficult to locate, and then once you're inside, it's incredibly well sheltered. So the foundation of San Francisco was actually the Spanish building a military base on the top of the peninsula there called the Presidio. And in that picture, it's basically the green spot that you can see. It's a very interesting triangle shape, and one of the words for triangle is delta. And Task Force Delta was indeed one of the think tanks at the Presidio that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But it takes up, looking over towards the very right of the screen, you can see Golden Gate Park, and then there's a strip of land next to it they call the Panhandle. Now, that's where the 60s took place, basically. That's the home of the human being. The Haight-Ashbury district is at the end of the park. You have two major colleges there, University of San Francisco and University of California, San Francisco. And that whole area, it used to be known as the Outside Lands. So there's a big music festival that still takes place in Golden Gate Park called the Outside Lands. But it was basically a wasteland of the city and was used for training and camping purposes by the soldiers based at the Presidio. The Presidio is also where Burning Man started, and you'll see that big yellow gold star right down there. That is Baker Beach, and Burning Man started on the northern nude end of Baker Beach. So back in the 80s, 1986 is the official start date of Burning Man. This was a time when San Francisco was just really establishing its global identity as, I guess, the leading light of the LGBT movement in the world. And so I think it was probably a fairly safe place for homosexuals to be, but at the same time, this was like the beginning of AIDS, and it was nowhere near as tolerant and liberal as it was today. And so these nude beaches were kind of a private escape, and I think were frequented by people in the LGBT community. So this is where Burning Man got started. But of all the nude beaches in the Bay Area, the one they chose is right next to this military base, the Presidio. It also happens to have absolutely spectacular views of the Golden Gate Bridge and the sunset. So there could be some other reasons for them picking that. Okay, so this is a shot of the Presidio from the air. And we can see a couple of quite interesting things on this map. So where Burning Man was founded, Baker Beach, right next to the Presidio, it's actually very, very close, like basically a block from where the Church of Satan was founded 20 years before. The Church of Satan was founded on a holy, magical, satanic day, Walpurgisnacht, April the 30th. Also the day of May the 1st, May Day, the foundation of the Illuminati. And that's also Labor Day in Europe and the UK. And Burning Man takes place on Labor Day weekend now in the US. But when it was founded in 1986, it was founded on the summer solstice, June 21st. It was a Saturday. And they refer to that as the North Solstice. Another organization that was also founded in San Francisco in 1986 was the Cacophony Society. And in the official history of Burning Man, they'll tell you the tale that the Cacophony Society was this freewheeling group of pranksters who sort of gave birth to Burning Man. And that's what I'd always heard and known. So in doing this research, it was most interesting to me to find that they were formed at the same time, 1986, as well as another organisation called MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, who just had their 30th birthday last week. On the other side of the bridge there, you can see at the top left Fort Cronkite, and that was the location of the second hacker conference. We mentioned that briefly last week. This was organised by Stuart Brand, and basically got together all of the leading lights of the hacker computer world. You know, Wozniak was there, Captain Crunch, and John Perry Barlow was there, and these guys talk about what is it to be a hacker? How can hackers work with the government? What should everyone be afraid of with hackers? Basically, this was the beginnings of creating this hacker cyberpunk style culture, and amazingly, that also happened in 1986, and amazingly, that also happened on a military base, technically part of the same military-owned and operated parcel of land as the Presidio. So I don't know how we're going to work the coincidence counter here, Jan, but I see quite a few coincidences. I think the fact that Burning Man started on a military base, or immediately next to a military base, that's one coincidence for sure. I think the Church of Satan started next to it, like a block away, the same military base. That's another pretty big coincidence. And then you have the Hacker Conference and the Cacophony Society and the MAPS beginning in the same year. So maybe we can put that down to 5 coincidences.
Now, where is MAPS located? I don't remember.
They're not shown on this actual map. I believe they're over in the East Bay, actually. And also, there's a couple of stars on this map that are worth mentioning. Can you see my mouse moving around there?
I cannot.
Not really?
No.
Okay, I'll just describe them then. So at the bottom right of this map, there's a yellow star, and that is Burning Man headquarters. They're at 660 Alabama Street, but it's a pretty big building. It goes for most of the block, and there is no 666 Alabama Street. That's the same property, same building. Directly above them is another gold star, which was Burning Man's previous offices. They were in 4 stories of a high-rise in Market Street in San Francisco, very close to City Hall and the United Nations Plaza. And then following that up in a straight line, you see the Long Now Foundation, which is at Fort Mason. That is where Stuart Brand bases his operations, I think, these days. And a lot of the old school super genius guys of Silicon Valley are kind of connected to that Long Now Foundation. I'm a member, and I would recommend anyone go down and check their talks out. They have some absolutely fascinating speakers, but you've got to be ready for a hearty dose of transhumanism.
Wow.
And then also just over to the right of the Long Now Foundation, there's another little yellow star, and that was another satanic house at the Presidio. That we'll talk about that one a little bit later, I think. Let's move on to the next slide, unless you have any further questions on that.
No, that's all right.
All right, so I think 5 coincidences for that. So the history of the Presidio, it's about a 1,500-acre parcel of land. As I said, San Francisco was founded when they set the Presidio up. This area, the peninsula, it wasn't actually the first place to be settled. The settlement happened more where Oakland is today and in the East Bay, and it was kind of difficult to get to the peninsula of San Francisco from the rest of the Bay Area before they built all of these amazing bridges. The Presidio was the longest continuously operated military base in the United States. It went from the 26th of June, 1776, until it was shut down in 1994. The place is absolutely riddled with tunnels and bunkers and gun batteries, and that goes back to in the days of the 18th century. Their primary concern was pirates coming with a whole bunch of cannons, and they needed to have cannons of their own to sink the pirate ships. So it's very, very well fortified against a pirate invasion. And if we ever return to the days of cannons, San Francisco will be great. The tunnels and bunkers and caves underneath. Douglas Dietrich, who used to work as a librarian at the Presidio, he has said that one of his tasks was to destroy all of the maps of them so that there are no actual complete maps anywhere within the military of that tunnel and bunker system. I've no way of knowing if that's true or not, but certainly there's a lot of tunnels. There's an area to the north of the Presidio that's called Crissy Field, and this was when the United States was looking at the very first beginnings of an air force. This is where they were doing the experimentation. So the Wright brothers, managed to achieve powered flight. The military is like, well, what are we going to do with this powered flight? Can we drop bombs out of it? And of course they could. But this level of experimentation started with a guy called General Hap Arnold. And out in the wine country, this guy has a roundabout dedicated to him and a highway, Arnold Highway. If anybody lives out in Sonoma will be familiar with it. And, he was responsible for setting up this experimental research in flight going on at Crissy Field, which kind of was America's first Area 51. When World War II came about, this was the headquarters of the war with Japan. And if you think about World War II, it was a war on multiple fronts, but what America did in helping out, we sent a lot of troops to help the British. And our troops went to Germany and they helped liberate Germany. But, we weren't really sitting in a bunker in the Pentagon calling in airstrikes in Germany on the Battle of the Bulge. But on the other hand, on the Pacific front, that was entirely being run by the United States, and that was being run out of the Presidio. It's also is essentially the military base of Bohemian Grove, and I think in the next part we'll maybe talk about Bohemian Grove a little bit. Secret society based in the Bay Area, and there's a very, very long history of the generals and admirals of the military all being very regular Bohemian Grovers.
What insights can you share with us about your performance at the Bohemian Grove?
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't talk much about the Bohemian Grove because, it's a place that people go to get away from the spotlight. A lot of relatively well-known guys are members of that club. Basically, it was founded 130 years ago or so by artists and writers, for artists and writers. And still, in order to get in, you have to have something to offer in that regard. A lot of the members are successful entrepreneurs or businessmen of one sort or another, but they all have an artistic bent. The stuff you hear about it in the rumor mill is, while entertaining, I've never caught any virginal sacrifices, anything kind of remotely like that. He's had some interesting times up there. And there are a lot of movers and shakers in that club, and I enjoy the chance, given my mindset, my Weltschmerz, if you will. I enjoy a chance to get together with those guys and knock a couple back and talk it down. One time I spent a weekend up there. I ran into a guy named General Bill Quinn, and we had a couple drinks together. We were sitting in front of a fireplace, and we just started telling. We fell in together, and we started telling war stories. He was the guy that Hermann Goering surrendered, not his sword, but basically it was a mace. He surrendered but he sought out Bill Quinn. Wild Bill Quinn, who was also the original head of the OSS, which became the CIA. He was a very, very interesting guy.
When the United Nations was actually the plan for it was hatched in World War II, they brought a whole bunch of people in from all the different countries, and they bussed them to the Presidio, and they had a number of different events for them at the Presidio. And then they took them out to Bohemian Grove as well. So the United Nations plans invented supposedly a place in Bohemian Grove called the Chalet, but basically where the pitch was given to the delegates was in conferences at the Presidio, and then they took them down next to City Hall to some of the military buildings down there to do the final signing of the UN Charter. We had a secret defence language school here in the Presidio during World War II. That's now known today as the Defence Language Institute, and it's not so secret anymore. But so this is where you would get all different branches of the military, but also different branches of intelligence agencies coming to study and to be trained for specific missions. It was the home of the Army's psychological operations headquarters, and also the home of their Psi warriors, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in tonight's presentation. There's a pet cemetery down there. It's a hell of a spooky place, and this pet cemetery, they don't really know officially when it got started. There's one general that they think was the guy that came up with it, but there's no paperwork, and it sort of ran until the 60s. And then apparently it's quite a common practice for people to just go there and bury their pets in the cemetery, even though it had been closed down. And I guess no one thought that was particularly strange, people digging up cemeteries at night, in this place where the Church of Satan is nearby. And interestingly as well, in this pet cemetery is there's a whole bunch of graves for the unknown soldier type thing, like unmarked, unnamed graves. And I don't know about you, but I've never had a family pet that didn't have a name before. So we got to wonder what was being done to the animals on this base. And I've heard some bad stories. We'll just leave it there. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino was actually the Deputy Director of Reserve Training at the Presidio, and he was the founder of the Temple of Set. He was also basically the number 2 guy in the Church of Satan. He published their newsletter called The Cloven Hoof, and he wrote a book called The Church of Satan. So, basically what it seems like to me is that the guy Anton LaVey who founded it, he was a bit of a showman. He's a former circus performer and lion tamer. This guy Aquino, extremely intelligent, decorated PSYOP specialist, came in and basically started taking over and calling the shots. And when he'd taken it as far as he could, broke away and started his own group called the Temple of Set. So we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But it's sort of important to understand in the history of the Presidio that the Church of Satan started next to it. The PSYOPs guys were working out of it, and many of the PSYOPs guys were members of the Church of Satan. Wrote the Bible on or added to the Army's chaplain's handbook, the Satanic Bible and stuff from this religion. So, if there was anywhere in the world that you could say was an epicenter of Satanism, San Francisco has a very good claim. And where the middle of that would be within San Francisco, I think the Presidio has an extremely good claim for that.
Wow.
So there was a satanic ritual abuse scandal between 1986 and sort of 1988, 1989 at the Presidio. It all sort of ended. There was a big fire again on a solstice or equinox, and the area where a lot of the records relating to the investigation had been stored, that burned down. And then there was another fire a few weeks later where the daycare center itself, where hundreds of children potentially had been abused, that burned down as well. I've got a picture there of Michael Aquino's book, and everyone is encouraged to read it. In the book, he claims that this was a financial scam and that his right of freedom of religion as a Satanist was being impinged upon by opportunists who feared him due to their Christian faith and were seeking to exploit him for money. I'll guess we might as well stay neutral on that in this presentation. People can look this guy up, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet. They can read his book and hear his side of things as well. But there's no question that many, many children were abused at the Presidio. There was medical evidence, including diseases, and it does seem like the case was sort of hushed up to quite a severe degree, where basically the last thing we really can point to of any significance happening at the Presidio was this case hitting the national news in a scandal, and then the base itself was ordered to be closed, and these buildings were all demolished. And the psychological operations group that had been operating out of there, it was relocated, and they moved down to Moffett Field, and basically all of Silicon Valley and the modern internet in particular sprung up around them. Okay, so after the military moved out of the Presidio, Disney moved in. And there was a few steps involved in that. Really, we can look to George Lucas, who came in and took over the leases at the Presidio. And then he went and sold his Star Wars empire to Disney. But the story's a little bit more complicated than that. And I guess we go back to last week's show where I mentioned that Disney in many ways gave birth to Silicon Valley because they picked up a graduate student's engineering thesis and said, oh, there's some technology in here that we really must use in our movie Fantasia. So we need 8 of these devices, go and make them. And that created the company Hewlett-Packard. So Disney spun out HP. And then in World War II, Disney kind of was taken over by the military and became, a major source of propaganda from the Western sides being used to combat the Nazis. And even Hitler himself was apparently quite a fan of Disney's work. And you can have a look online. If you Google Adolf Hitler Disney paintings, you will see apparently Hitler used to sit there and paint Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and stuff like that. But it's all, Hitler was very into the occult, and Disney is absolutely into the occult. I mean, I think you could probably not name one corporation that has done more to advance the occult in the world than Disney over the last 100 years. Would you agree with that, Jan?
Yeah, that and drugs and a whole lot of other stuff. Disneyland is a homage to, or it's dedicated to the occult and drugs. Yeah,
and Disneyland was designed by SRI.
Absolutely.
Sure enough.
Well, and they build the park in the 50s, so that must have kicked off right around when MK Ultra was kicking off.
Yeah, all seem to happen around.
Would that be a coincidence?
Ding ding! I think we have another coincidence there. That as SRI were designing Disneyland, they were designing MK Ultra at the same time.
Yeah, let's see. What was the year that Disneyland was founded? 1955. So July 17, 1955. It opened then.
Yeah, and basically, Walt Disney had a board meeting with the Disney board, said, I want to make this my dream. I want to make this park Disneyland. The board said, okay, Walt, go and do it. And the next day he calls up the Stanford Research Institute to go make it for him.
This is too good. Listen to this. So here's another coincidence here. So MK Ultra was funded by the CIA on April 13, 1953. Disney bought a 160-acre site near Anaheim in 1953.
Yeah, well, and I've got the Disneyland was designed by SRI, hired April 1953. So just in time for the Bohemian Grove summer hijinks.
So coincidence. What I want to do, instead of starting the coincidence counter fresh on each episode or each part, I'm just going to continue it all the way through. So in part 1 we had 3. You had counted 2. We had 3 because there was one other, and then I'm just going to keep a running count through this episode.
Sure. Yeah, I think it'll be pretty easy to lose count, but I'm already above my coincidence threshold. But there's quite a few more to get to just in this slide alone. So we mentioned last night how there were some links between Esalen and Star Trek, and it seems that Gene Roddenberry from Star Trek spent a bit of time at Esalen. But in the Star Trek universe, the Presidio is actually the home of the Starfleet Academy. This is where they set out from to go on their great voyage to boldly go where no man has been before. And it's also the birth of the Galactic Federation. And the Galactic Federation is very similar to the United Nations. I mean, they basically have the same kind of idea, and it just happens to be the same kind of idea as H.G. Wells and the New World Order and the globalists and the Illuminati as well.
Well, I should mention that I was close friends with George Clayton Johnson for about, 24, 25 years. And he died in the last year. But, and George Clayton Johnson was even on the podcast early on. And he co-wrote with Gene Roddenberry episode 1 of Star Trek. And
Right. Wow.
So...
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of good in Star Trek. People love the show, and I think that generally the values in Star Trek are positive, uplifting, humanitarian values. And it's the same thing with the United Nations. Generally, the values, when you hear them say it, gee, that sounds really nice.
Yeah.
But you have to look at who these people are, who they associate with. The United Nations, I believe, has a Kaaba Blackstone temple in their headquarters. It was all set up by Annie Besant, Theosophist. Their publication division is the Lucis Trust, and they had to change the name from the Lucifer Trust.
Right.
Yeah, and so the UN got started in San Francisco. Basically, the plan was hatched at Bohemian Grove. They brought all the delegates from around the world to the Presidio, but then they moved it to New York. And Rockefeller quite conveniently said, "Hey, listen, I got some spare land, and I'll just build you a building, and you can stick it there if you like. I mean, if you guys don't have any other buildings lying around or anything to put the United Nations in." And off we go. Another coincidence. Coming back to Disney at the Presidio, another interesting link was Walt was friends with Werner von Braun, and he was basically the Nazi rocket scientist brought over here in Operation Paperclip, and went on to kind of be the creator of NASA.
Which is funny when you think about the whole argument that the moon landing was faked and all of this stuff, and them doing all of this. And I've watched this 1950s or 40s video or documentary from Disney about the whole space program, and with Werner von Braun and the early rocket scientists that they brought over from Germany.
That's right, and you can see the World War II propaganda that Disney was making to promote the American way of life and the American dream. In the 1950s and 1960s, they were still making the same propaganda. It was these space movies and these things that were not just done, hey, can we come to NASA and film a couple of your spaceships? These guys are going to these think tanks together at SRI and at the Presidio, and they're planning exactly how these psyops are going to be disseminated out. And then we get to George Lucas, and his company was called Industrial Light and Magic. And so, of course, there's an immediate in-your-face occult reference there. But George Lucas got his big break at Altamont. And
I knew you were going to say that.
Happens to be sitting at Altamont with a movie camera when a kid gets stabbed in the head by the Hells Angels while Sympathy for the Devil is playing.
Right. Well, Meredith Hunter, exactly.
Yeah. So he
So how many coincidences is that now? We're getting out of control.
I haven't even reached the end of the slide yet. You know what I mean? But Lucas at one point he had this animation crew called Pixar, and the guy John Lasseter from Pixar is a multi-billionaire Bay Area genius. I'm not sure if he's a burner, but a lot of the Pixar people are burners, and Disney was like, I don't really need this guy. I've got my own Industrial Light and Magic crew. What am I going to do with it? It's Steve Jobs. And so Lucas goes to Jobs. It's like, hey, Jobs, you just got kicked out of Apple. You got a bit of money still. Why don't you put money into this Pixar thing and save the day and be a white knight? And Jobs is like, okay, cool, yeah, all right. So he writes a check for $5 million. And that gets him Pixar, and he guarantees another $5 million of debt. So basically, picks this thing up for $10 million, $5 million down, a pretty good deal. He goes on to sell it to Disney for $7.6 billion. So although when Jobs went back to Apple as the CEO, they famously paid him $1 a year as his salary. And people think, well, that's very generous of him. But he also got full use of the Apple fleet of corporate jets for him and his family. And you can easily rack up $20 million a year in those private jets, So he was doing all right. But this transaction to sell Pixar into Disney, that made him the largest individual shareholder of Disney, and his estate still is. So there you have a merger between Apple and Disney that took place that, has I think only broadened and deepened. And we saw around about the time of that going on, maybe it was a little bit after, but Apple famously bought out Dr. Dre and the Beats by Dre empire, another $3 billion transaction. And there's a rumor on the internet that Dr. Dre started Burning Man, which is kind of funny. But if you go and watch the video, and perhaps we could put a clip on of this one of Tupac, California Love. And it basically looks like these guys are at Burning Man. They're in the desert filming a Mad Max scene. And there's a letter that purports to be from Dr. Dre saying, yo, we found these hippies in the desert. No one was charging tickets. I called up the feds and got a permit, and now I was charging tickets. And, it's very easy to dismiss, this Dr. Dre letter conspiracy theory. Until you look at, well, hang on, but Apple bought Dr. Dre for $3.2 billion. And Disney bought Steve Jobs' Pixar out for $7.6 billion. And then Disney bought Lucas out. And all these intertwining incestuous connections within this industry. Timothy Leary operating his cells in LA. And we're getting a little off topic, but there's also you can read on the internet about a famous meeting that was purported to happen in about 1992 in Los Angeles, where they got together all of the leading rappers of the world and said, we are going to basically deliver crack and degeneracy, and we're going to promote women as prostitutes, and we're going to get everyone to buy the Jacob the Jeweler watch. And you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I've read that letter, in fact, and very interesting. Somebody sent that to me a couple years ago, or maybe last year when we started the Hans Utter episode. It's probably linked in the Brain database. I'll hopefully be able to put it up here.
And anyway, just sticking to what we do know without having to get into wild speculation, there is just an incredible number of ties here. And another one is that Disney was basically almost entirely financed by A.P. Giannini. He was the founder of the Bank of Italy, and he basically innovated this concept of retail banking. He opened bank branches, and he got up to about 20 branches. And then he bought the Bank of America in New York. And within 40 years of founding his empire, he had the largest bank in the world. And this guy sort of came from nowhere. He married a daughter of a property developer, and when her dad passed away, he sort of took over the family property empire. But, when they were trying to get the Golden Gate Bridge financed, they wanted to build it from the Presidio over to Marin County. And they'd been trying to do it for a long time, and the military really resisted. They thought it was a strategic problem, that someone would blow the bridge up and they'd have to clean it up or something like that. But the people of San Francisco really, really wanted this bridge. And, it was fighting for years, a big stalemate, but eventually everyone was on side. The military, the people, everyone. But there was no money. There was no money to pay for the bridge because it had been this Great Depression and everything. Well, this guy, A.P. Giannini, founder of the Bank of America, basically pulls out his personal checkbook and underwrites $35 million of bond issue, not from Bank of America, himself. I mean, imagine that the money in this day and age. Today, the toll on the Golden Gate Bridge is $6, and there's about 1 million cars a day going over this. So that's about a $2 billion a year revenue stream. And this guy can just finance it from his own pocket. But he also financed just about all of the Disney movies and a bunch of other very famous movies as well, like It's a Wonderful Life would be an example about the good banker that looks after the small little guy in America and everything. It's the classic Bank of America story. So this guy was a big Bohemian guy. He's financing Disney's films. He's financing this bridge. Everything's passing, and Disney's still there today. Also at the Presidio today is the Walt Disney Museum. So if you want to find out about Disney, you don't go to Disneyland or Disney World. You come down to the Presidio military base. And what you won't find out, though, is that basically a lot of the ideas in these movies, and particularly in Star Wars, have come out of this group that we've been describing. So coming out of Esalen, there's the hero's journey. George Lucas has openly said that that's what Star Wars is based on. You got Ronald Reagan had something called the Strategic Defense Initiative. And that's another plan that was hatched at Bohemian Grove. But you and I are both old enough to remember that. I think, Jan, it was known as Star Wars. Yeah. And basically space-based weapon systems. And the other thing that we're going to get into a bit more tonight is SRI and Army Intelligence had a project known as Project Jedi. And this was under General Stubblebine, and this was people trying to walk through walls and move objects with their minds. And if you watch Star Wars, that's exactly what Luke does with the Force. He's moving objects with his mind. So not only was this a real military project to use Psi warrior abilities, but the name of the project was Project Jedi. Okay, so we moved away from the Presidio in 1994 when it was shut down, and the 7th Psychological Operations Group, and I mistakenly called it a division in last week's presentation, so I apologize for that, military people. 7th Psychological Operations Group operates out of Moffett Field, which is a former NASA, JPL, Lockheed Martin facility that is now a Google facility. Just like the Presidio has changed hands, it's in the hands of Disney. This former military base is now in the hands of Google. And Google has their own 767. They have some corporate jets. They have some military fighter jets. All the usual things you need to help people search on the internet. Like, I don't know how I'd find things on Google if the CEO didn't have a military fighter jet on standby. But where these guys are located, basically the entire World Wide Web has sort of emerged around them. And just to read out some of the names that I've highlighted on this aerial shot of Silicon Valley. Over to the left there, we have the Stanford complex. And so you have the venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road at the far left of this slide. They're not actually technically part of Stanford. The land isn't technically part of the Stanford campus, but it's right next to it. You cross the road and you're there. And this is perhaps the greatest concentration of speculative capital that the world has ever seen. This is where the famous story of Mark Zuckerberg going in his pajamas and telling them to get stuffed over $16 million, that happened down here at this Sand Hill Road. And it's an easy bike ride from the Stanford campus, which is massive. You have the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, a little bit further to the north, SRI International, Palantir Technologies, the mega unicorn spying on us. That's there. Facebook is up in East Palo Alto. I've highlighted his little Illuminati hoodie that they call it, that they have there. And then coming down to where you see this big airstrip around Moffett Field, you have NASA Ames. You have Lockheed Martin Space and Missile Systems. You have Yahoo. You have Northrop Grumman. You have General Dynamics, Carnegie Mellon University. Microsoft has a campus down there. And then you have the massive Googleplex. So, and I mentioned this last week, between Google search, Yahoo search, and Microsoft Bing, that's pretty much the search of the Western world that's going on. And Yahoo also owns a quarter of Alibaba, which is Chinese commercial search. They also own, it's either the eBay of Japan or actually eBay itself in Japan. So Yahoo is a bigger empire than just search, as is Google. They own a bunch of military robots, but all of these groups, cluster together around this Moffett Field, NASA Ames. There's obviously an enormous amount of classified research and development going on with companies like Lockheed Martin Space and Missile Systems, which is the #1 arms manufacturer on the planet. That's what's next to Google, the biggest weapons company on Earth. So it's quite incredible that here we have the 7th Psychological Operations Group at the Presidio, staffed with members of the Temple of Set and Church of Satan. We have the Church of Satan itself starting next to them. We have satanic ritual abuse going on at the Presidio. And then we have the satanic ritual of Burning Man occurring at the Presidio. And when Burning Man starts with this ritual, the internet starts at the exact same time as well. And then when the satanic ritual abuse comes out as a scandal in the media, the base gets shut down. Burning Man happens to move their ritual as well out to a different location, which we can go into later. And then the psychological operations group, they split. And then this is basically when the web gets launched. The web sort of springs up in a circle around this hub here. So quite amazing, to use this trivia method, looking at the where and when. In this case, looking at the where of the Presidio and of the 7th Psychological Operations Group. It's really quite a revealing story.
Wow. Well, I think the counter just went off the charts while you were going right there.
Yeah. We're easily losing count on these ones. So what is PSYOP? And basically, this stuff has a pretty ancient history. But psychological operations are planned operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences in order to influence their emotions, motives, objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. So this is really ways to control large numbers of people at once. And the main tool of PSYOPs is media, electronic transmission, because they can get that one-to-many transmission where a single voice can reach 1 million people at once, but they can also do quite targeted, direct one-to-one transmission. And that's when you get in to some of the more electronic technologies like psychotronics is one branch where they're literally doing mind control with harmonies and with frequencies. But PSYOP is more doing mind control with the classical trivium and how do we use fancy words to fool people. It comes from Sun Tzu, who's a great war strategist. He wrote The Art of War. He said that all warfare is based on deception. And so that's the nature of PSYOP. If you ask a PSYOP specialist, they might tell you that there's such a thing as a positive PSYOP, that we control a population by inspiring them and motivating them. And, you do find countries like North Korea where they are run on that model. But I personally don't really think that there's anything particularly good about PSYOP. And the most dangerous thing that I see about this military technology is how easy it is to apply it on a domestic population. And I think that, that's the evidence of MK Ultra is that these guys had no real hesitation in deploying this type of stuff on domestic population. Operation Mockingbird would be one example of misleading the media, but a classic one is obviously War of the Worlds, and you've got a show on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Went to spend a couple of weeks at Princeton investigating that whole thing.
Yeah, so that's a PSYOP coming straight out of the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study, Princeton Radio Project, using H.G. Wells' story to look at how can we create a mass panic with this electronic technology. A couple of other quotes on PSYOPs. The Mossad motto is, "By way of deception, thou shalt do war." Another PSYOP quote here is, "Capture their minds and their hearts and souls will follow." So this is the new battle space of the 21st century, is the mind. And that's what they're trying to capture. Throughout history, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, I've got some links in the notes to this to people want to read up a bit more on them. And you've talked about Hassani Sabah in your series with Hans as well, and the assassins.
Yes.
Basically, the
hash smokers.
Yeah, but this wasn't just drugs and secret societies and disguises and all the other usual occult stuff. It was also striking fear in their hearts, because the king could no longer trust his Praetorian Guard, his safest advisors, because they could be assassins in disguise, and so that created a lot of fear. It's not just about fear. Some of the best mind control works if people actually aren't afraid at all, and they're lulled into a false sense of security. And the basis of hypnosis is to put people into a trance, misdirect them, and mind control them, and that's what psyops is all about as well. There's a shift around World War II. We're going to get a little bit more into that in a second. Around psychology and consensus management as really the objective of the military. And it was around this theory that it was easier to control 1 million people than to kill 1 million people. If you kill them, you have to dispose of the bodies and all of their effects, and it's just messy. But if you can just give them nice, propaganda messages and control them, you don't have to do any of that stuff. So, and that, we certainly have seen a shift in warfare around propaganda that's continuing today. A couple of other famous examples. There's some talk on the internet that the punk movement was created by the KGB as a psyop. I'm not sure about that one. I think it might.
I've read that too. Yeah,
it might be a psyop itself.
Well, I have done research on that, and it seems to be centered around Washington D.C. actually.
Right, but certainly from Dave McGowan's work on Laurel Canyon, we can see that most of the psychedelic rock movement was probably created as a psyop.
Interestingly, William Burroughs ties into that, so there's that again. But let me see. All of these came out of all of these guys like Henry Lawrence Garfield or Henry Rollins. They were coming out of Glover Park, Washington, D.C., and that includes Ian MacKaye, Jeff Nelson, Lyle Pressler. But that seems to have been the whole kickoff is right around Glover Park. Some wealthy families there.
Interesting. Just in my pictures here, I've got a couple of pictures I pulled from the Wikipedia PSYOP page, and you notice that the shape of the loudspeaker that they have, it's basically a horn-shaped speaker with a sort of baffle or something in the middle, and then underneath that is a picture from Burning Man, and this is these Function 1 loudspeakers that are incredibly popular at Burning Man, and you get a really great clean sound out of them, and you can stand in front of them and have a conversation even though it's blasting out at full volume. And so quite another interesting coincidence there that the sort of speakers that you see at these raves kind of look the same shape as the sort of speakers that the PSYOPs people use. Maybe that one's a pure coincidence. I don't know. So looking specifically at the 7th Psychological Operations Group, which moved to Moffett Field and has its headquarters down there, they have 4 battalions. They have two of them in the Bay Area, another one in St. Louis, and another one in Austin, Texas. And it's quite interesting that these are the 4 locations of the Army PSYOPs. Austin, Texas, that's the home of Alex Jones, of Stratfor, of South by Southwest Festival, which is mixing music, culture, technology together. And it's apparently one of the United Nations blueprint cities. Austin also has the University of Texas there, which is a major military contractor, and they have some of the largest gold reserves in the world. You wouldn't believe what a university needs more than $1 billion of gold, but I guess they need that in Texas. The battalions down at Moffett Field, they've been there since '94. I mentioned the companies they're with. On the military social media sites, there's 249 people that have linked their profiles to this group. And the interesting thing is that these psychological operations are quite often Army Reserve soldiers. So as well as working for the military in PSYOPs, they have day jobs as well. And some of the day jobs are actually listed on these military profiles. And I'm not going to reveal anybody's identities here, but just in very broad terms, here's some of the categories of the day jobs that you find here. So you've got bus drivers, and not just any old commuter bus, but in the Bay Area we have these special tech buses that they have Wi-Fi in them, and it's basically considered an extension of the office. So they'll pick you up near your home, and then you can be doing your work and your emails and everything on the bus on the way to work. Well, what do you know? It looks like at least a couple of those buses are driven by Army Reserve PSYOP people. You've got an immigration lawyer probably dealing with all these tech execs trying to come in with their hot startups. Multiple members of the police department, some are quite high ranking. EMTs, IT network administrator, which is probably a pretty great job for PsyOps people to have. You can get right in the guts of systems if you have those sysadmin root passwords. Quite a few people involved in various news services, quite large, prominent mainstream news services, and they're not shy about mentioning this on their social media profiles. One a regional sales rep for a major beverage company, and then even a priest, priest by day, army psyop by night. So it's all walks of life, and then another one I'll mention is that I'm aware of at least one Burning Man DPW crew member who was recruited at Burning Man to go down to work out of the Army Reserve at Moffett Field. I'll read the quote out at the bottom for people that are just listening, which is, within the psychological operations battalions, there are a number of tactical psychological operations companies. Such companies are organized in the same manner as other tactical psychological operations companies Army-wide. Consists of a headquarters section, tactical PSYOP development detachment, a TPDD, and 3 tactical PSYOP detachments, or TPDs. The TPDD focuses on product development and target audience analysis, while the TPD usually focuses on product distribution, face-to-face engagement with a given target audience, and loudspeaker operations. So to relate that jargon into language that we're probably a bit more familiar with, the TPDD, the product development and target audience analysis, they're the ones working out the talking points and who they're going to go attack today. Is it trivia method? Is it chemtrails? Is it Burning Man? Is it vaccines? And then the TPD, the ones going out with the face-to-face engagement with a given target audience, that's the trolls. So they get their briefing, they get their targeting, and then they get unleashed on the internet to come and make lives miserable for the rest of us.
Yeah, we should start billing, sending these guys bills, for every time we catch their trolls and have to deal with them, Start.
Well, I think it might make your life easier, Jan. I've seen you with some pretty low-level trolling lately. It seems like their standards are slipping, and they really should be investing in some first-rate training, and you could probably teach them to do their jobs a lot better and perhaps, target some of the actual enemies of this country, such as ISIS.
Yeah, well, that would be, a little bit much for them, I suppose, to actually do real jobs and things like that.
You could be the front side of trolling.
Exactly, for those of you who want front side memberships. No, but anyway, I've often, I see so many trolls going through my Facebook page on a daily basis. I would say every day I would probably get 5 to 10 attempted friend requests from trolls.
Wow.
So I have a feeling that they're even using me to train their noobs or something like that. So
right.
I should probably start billing them for
exactly.
for $1 million a year and start getting them to pay me for this stuff. And then,
well, as we saw in part 1, these guys have got quite large budgets.
Well, and as soon as part 1 was uploaded of this series, my website immediately went under attack. I was getting attack notifications all night from the website security, and with the trolling increased on Facebook, on YouTube, everything just immediately overnight.
Yeah, I also experienced an increase in trolls on my site. It had been quite quiet for a while, but hey, welcome back, trolls. Everybody else, we just encourage you. You don't have to believe what I say or what Jan says. We're not here to convince anyone. We're sharing our research that we spent a lot of time on, and we're sharing freely all of the links and references. You can read it for yourself. Make up your own.
Check the citations. Don't worry about, you don't need ad hominems against us. And Steve is from the tech industry. He's an insider. Everything he's got to say is therefore invalid. No, just focus on the research. Verify the citations and the research that he's providing, and that should be enough. We don't need to use poisoning the well and guilt by association and circumstantial ad hominems to dismiss somebody. It's called killing the messenger when you do that. It's just focus on the research, on the citations, folks, and knock off the crud. Use some critical thinking.
Yeah, and I think for most people on the internet these days, we do encounter trolls from time to time. We know that trolls are there, but looking at this slide, it does make you think that a lot of people that you're running into in day-to-day life, there maybe is a secret second life going on that you don't know about, and there's other agendas. And I tend to take communications on the internet at face value, but quite often people are being disingenuous, or they're trying to play these little word games because that's actually their job. The government or some corporation is paying them money to go and be mean to people on Facebook.
Have you noticed the different levels of trolls online? Like you have your basic, in my line of research and doing this show for 8 years, you see the basic, high school dropouts. They're reading like a telemarketer script troll. These are you're just the lowest bottom feeders in society as you can go. And then you have, excuse me, guys, forgive me. No, I mean it really. But then you have, higher level people that are college grads and stuff. They tackle more sophisticated material. And then I've seen your university professors, even all the way. I've dealt with Harvard trolls, people that I had actually interviewed and interacted with before that I later figured out. And they would troll. I've seen trolls from the White House.
Yeah, so well, I mean, it's going all the way through our society, and it reminds me of that Orwell quote that in times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Right.
And it does seem that we are in a time of universal deceit.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's by accident. I think that's quite by design. And it's probably a good segue into the next slide, shooting back to World War II for a little bit. Right. And the Tavistock Institute. And Brigadier General Sir John Rawlings Rees, basically during World War II, he put together this invisible college of think tank that we're helping him, and this is a lot of the guys from the Special Operations Executive and the OSS Office of Strategic Studies, our usual little group of suspects, the Margaret Meads and the Henry Luce, basically a lot of these elite individuals and families came together around World War II, and basically the military and intelligence agencies and banking system were merged. But what the military was looking at was this new technology of psychological warfare. And they basically say, look, this is great. We don't need to have 1 million troops that we have to ship around the world and shoot each other. All we need to have is 4,000 psychiatrists. They're going to be our psychiatric shock troops. And cutting a long story short with this idea, these psychiatrists would fly around the world. They would give conferences. They would attend conferences. They would publish papers and books, and they would basically establish the consensus. And that's what's happened, and that's happened extremely well in society, particularly because of the control they've had over the electronic media. And so through the use of newspaper, radio, television, movies, books, video games, comics, art, they basically create the culture. And then through the use of psychiatrists, they say what's normal and what isn't. And the main book of psychiatry, the DSM, was it the Manual of Statistical Diagnosis or something like that?
Right.
And in each successive edition of this book, they have broadened the window of, what is normal, what is sane, and what is insane, and what is a disorder.
Steve, I think you have an authority disorder.
Yeah, and I mean this is where they're trying to go with it. That if you question climate change, you could be locked up. If you question chemtrails, you could be locked up. It doesn't matter that you can see them in the sky. It doesn't matter that you can produce the patents. It doesn't matter that there's whistleblowers or even that there's now United Nations conventions on this stuff. Still, the official thing is that they don't exist. therefore question it, get locked up.
It's like that. I think I sent you the link to that article the other day about conspiracy theory. And I left the conspiracy world, and it was this whole loaded article. And
yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah,
and it's I've been reading a little bit today about Snopes, and the guy that set up Snopes is an ex-Department of Defense guy.
Yeah,
so,
and that's one of the worst, in my opinion. Excuse me. That's in my personal opinion. I feel that the information, the so-called debunkings on Snopes, are rarely accurate.
Yeah, well, I think you highlighted this very well in Spies in Academic Clothing, that they can debunk 95% of the stuff accurately, and it's that other 5% that's really where the intelligence community gets to work their magic, so to speak. And either they throw out a whole bunch of multiple competing wild theories, so no one really knows what did happen. I think 9/11 is probably a good example of that one. Or they try, they attack the messenger, or they try to, change the conversation away from fact-based discussion of anything. But the way that happens today, this was, quite an innovation in World War II with John Rawlings Rees. And we talked last weekend, and also your last Unspun show with Joe, you talked quite a bit about the Macy conferences and, but the Frankfurt School, that these social engineers, this didn't happen by accident. This is weaponized anthropology. This is saying we can, rule the world militarily through psychiatry rather than militarily through arms.
And that goes back to Aldous Huxley's quote. Let me see if I can find that here quickly. But, he basically says that we can learn to rule people by getting them to love their servitude rather than by bludgeoning them into, whatever.
So this thing was set up basically just after...
Sorry, just really quickly, and let me just read that. He says... let's see. Within the next generation, I believe that the world's rulers will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience.
Yeah, I mean...
that
says it all.
That says it all right there. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No problem. So, but basically, coming out of World War One, there were a couple of new innovations in warfare, and one was chemical warfare. There was a huge amount of mustard gas and things like that used in World War One. The other thing was this tank warfare. So instead of cannons firing in a direct line, you had howitzers and mortars firing vertically. You had planes dropping explosives from the sky. Basically, it was just bombs going off and explosives going off all around. And so there was a phenomenon that happened from that called shell shock, where the brain would literally vibrate within the skull, and these people would basically have mental illness as a consequence, a form of extremely severe post-traumatic stress. And they decided that they would set up a mental institute in London to study this phenomenon. And they is kind of the usual suspects in these things. First of all, it's the Duke of Bedford, or the Marquis of Tavistock, who's a member of the Russell family. The Russell are big opium traders, and basically set up Skull and Bones at Yale University. Initial funding came in from the Rothschilds, and then some later funding came in from the Rockefeller Foundation, and the British Crown put money into this as well. So this is the very, very top, the creme de la creme of society is who's put this in. And in this insane asylum where these poor soldiers are, kind of written off to the world, they did all kinds of experiments to try to help them. And this is where we get in the beginnings of the stuff that really came to the fore in MK Ultra, like electroshock therapy and lobotomies and stuff like that. And a lot of the experimentation and initial research that was going on in Tavistock was modeled at other institutes around the world, including the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. And then after World War II, some of the experiments on humans and on mind control and things like that, using torture and trauma-based mind control that the Nazis had been doing, those experimental programs were brought over to the US, and that fed into MK Ultra as well. So before the MK Ultra project began, we had very similar sort of, seems like, research objectives going on in the Tavistock Institute in London, and basically along the ideas of Freud. And then they established this global network where they plugged into, I'm just going to read some names out, University of Sussex, Stanford Research Institute, Esalen, MIT, MITRE and RAND Corporation, Hudson Institute, Heritage Foundation, the Center of Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown, US Air Force Intelligence. So key people at these corporations undergo indoctrination at one or more of the Tavistock-controlled institutions. And then there's also a network, the Mont Pelerin Society, the Trilateral Commission, the Ditchley Foundation, the Club of Rome, all of these organizations, and the Bilderberg Group that we talked about last week. They're going to each other's conferences. They're sitting on each other's boards of directors. But basically, this is John Coleman, who, I don't know if you've had him on your show, Jan. He'd probably be a great guest for you. I think he's still alive.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, but he was a British intelligence agent, and he got access to the National Archives of Great Britain, and he said because of his security clearances, he was able to see some material that others weren't. So he basically was the first whistleblower on the existence and operations of this Tavistock Institute. And then more recently, there's a book by Daniel Estlin on Tavistock, which is very good as well. Both of those are worth reading. But John Coleman said that, basically it's difficult to achieve prominence in any field unless you've been trained in the behavioral sciences at one of these subsidiaries. And they have basically a common goal, which is to break down the psychological strength of the individual, render him helpless to oppose the dictators of the New World Order. So any technique which helps to break down the family unit and the family inculcated principles like religion, honor, patriotism, and sexual behavior, it's used by the Tavistock Institutes as a weapon for crowd control. And this is sort of like Freud saying, gee, you probably could do this and no one would ever want to do it. And then his nephew Benet saying, my uncle says you could do it, so let's do it to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
They destabilize the character of the patient, and that induces permanent mental illness. The victim's then advised to establish new rituals of personal interaction. I'll say that again. Establish new rituals of personal interaction. So that is to indulge in brief sexual encounters which actually set the participants adrift with no stable personal relationship in their lives, destroying their ability to establish or maintain a family. And in there, I think we can see the worldwide rave scene that I was a part of in the 90s and the noughties. Certainly, there was a lot of people following that path there, and I think that in the burner scene as well, it's very much about establishing new rituals of personal interaction, disconnecting people from their outside lives and their traditional relationships, and wrapped up in an attack on the church and mocking the traditional Christian values.
Absolutely. You just nailed it right there.
Yeah,
Ladies and gentlemen, go back about 30 seconds and replay what Steve just said.
Yeah, so and this stuff, it hasn't emerged in these scenes by accidents. This has been engineered by psychologists who are being paid by the military in think tanks, that have been organized by ultra wealthy elite families and told, come up with ways that we can control large amounts of people at once. And this is their way: attack the church, attack the family unit. Take people away from whatever can anchor them towards right, like a moral compass, and encourage them to be their own moral compass. That
Absolutely.
Just do what you want. Do what they want.
And we did cover this in Unspun episode 4 with Joe on the the destruction of the family. So I also recommend people check out that show for more information on that. And yeah, that's a key thing, and I want to do a lot more work on just that topic alone.
Just to finish on this slide, I'll mention that basically at the end of World War II, we saw some things that really didn't make a lot of sense from a military point of view. And one of them was the carpet bombing of Dresden. Dresden was pretty much a civilian town. It didn't really have a lot of industry that would be a particular threat to the Allies. It wasn't crucial to the war at all, and they flattened it in the strategic bombing survey. So
the real Holocaust, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, a similar thing happened in Japan as well. That at the time of dropping Fat Man and Little Boy, the two nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war was pretty much over, and Japan was actually making attempts to surrender. So there wasn't really any military or strategic advantage gained from that nuclear attack. But around the same time they did that, they also heavily firebombed Tokyo. And that resulted in at least 100,000 deaths, potentially more than from the nuclear attack. And again, massive bombing, massive civilian destruction. And there's a number of competing theories on the internet about why this may have happened. One of them is that the plan was an experiment on mass psychology. So to create these holocausts, that we needed to have so much tragedy and death and destruction from World War II that there truly would be the war to end all wars. The horrors were so great that the only solution was to form the United Nations and to create a world government and to all be together. And so it's quite interesting that the groups coming up with the plans to form the United Nations are very closely connected to the groups coming up with the plans to do this mass bombing of the civilians. There's another darker theory about it, and if you look at some of the stuff that Douglas Dietrich has said on the internet, he goes into this in quite some detail, and he says some stuff that's worth consideration. But this theory says that these people are occultists, and not only are they occultists, but they're into black magic and into sacrifice, the worship of Baal, quite destructive, evil magic. And so this level of death and destruction and mayhem and fire raining from the sky was actually energy on a spiritual level. It was attempts to create mass negative evil rituals on the whole world at once.
Well, as far as I know, the word Holocaust actually means a burnt offering.
Right.
And in that context, Dresden, which the entire city was firebombed and leveled, and the entire population, only a few people survived it, but that was the real Holocaust.
Yeah. So anyway, we could talk. That's a whole nother show in itself. I think
it is. Sorry.
That's all right. Let me just wrap up a little bit on the Tavistock. I do really encourage people to learn more about this group, because it's if you've never heard of them, you wouldn't think it was anything special. And it seems crazy that one small little building in London could potentially rule the entire world. But when you look at what they're connected to and the sort of things they do and who's involved, this is a very, very powerful organization with a stated goal to control the world with these 4,000 psychiatric shock troops.
What's funny is I read a story trying to debunk the whole Tavistock thing one time online that said it wasn't possible because it was just a small office building and nothing really was going on there.
Yeah. Well, there's the Tavistock Institute and the Tavistock Clinic as well, and there's a few other different branches.
Well, and they can just have a headquarters with a P.O. box and have all this other stuff going on there, everywhere else. It doesn't matter how big the headquarters is.
Yeah, well, that's right, and in fact, on the slide at the top right there is some of the other groups that they're very, very tightly linked with, and that does include NASA, IMF, World Bank, Wharton School, the CIA, Rockefeller.
Right.
So, yeah, they're all tied together. Let me read this one quote. I thought this was pretty interesting. So, British mind control. Principles of modern psychology originated in esoterics, which is also the root of modern espionage and intelligence psyops, as well as parapsychology. Magic and religion has been employed to control populations since the dawn of written history. In military terms, psychic operations are called psychotronics. Adversaries are rogue psi operatives. For people listening, that's PSI, psi. Psi warriors who battle like sorcerers. Psychic self-defense employs thought disruption, shielding techniques, mind drain, and energy manipulation. Psionics is scientific magic, magecraft, the product of extraordinary human potential. Is that phrase again? Precogs, so this is like, was it Minority Report with people that can see the future? Precogs, like analysts, are attuned to the future. They understand viscerally that things are often not what they seem. Both are masters of disguise, the hidden environment, intelligence, espionage, and covert action. Both aim to tweak the timeline with small perturbations that pump up to macroscopic results, setting up currents of intentional influence. They also tweak minds by controlling the environment. No one can resist what they cannot detect. Both are inside-outsiders working at the fringes of the system. The outsider aesthetic is charged by a desire to break free from the contrivances of tradition. They look boldly outside the system and deep within themselves for inspiration that arises directly from creative source. Both work sub rosa, which comes from the Latin meaning under the rose for confidentiality. That refers to black ops. And this comes from the Masonic fraternal tradition. The rose is the emblem of Horus, the god of silence and secrecy. So these are psi warriors who battle like sorcerers, being employed by the military, being employed by psychiatrists, right? The psychiatrists are designing the battle plans for the sorcerers, you know? You couldn't make this stuff up. And if I walk down the street telling people that this is what's going on, they'd think that I was absolutely nuts. But the reality is that psychiatrists are the ones who are designing this, and this is being done to all of us every day. Another link here is made in 2002 from an executive intelligence review, linking the Tavistock Institute to Scottish Rite Masons, CIA, and MK Ultra. Now, I'm not sure about your own research. I think that there isn't necessarily a direct line from the Tavistock to the CIA and to MK Ultra, but if you look at the evolution of the MK Ultra programs and sub-projects, it's a pretty clear evolution of this line of thinking, and then the individuals behind them, they certainly move from one group to the next to the next.
Yeah, well, you know, actually I do have a direct connection to the CIA there, but you could go up, for instance, to the Club of Rome, and then there's, you know, connects to H.G. Wells and various people who would connect to it. But yeah, I mean, there's probably 30 or 40 or more different routes to go from Tavistock to the CIA. You know, Aldous Huxley worked with Tavistock. Edward Bernays, I think, I have in here. Yep, he worked with Tavistock. Both of them worked with the CIA.
Yeah, I got Margaret Mead up there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of it. And then you have, like, Eric L. Trist was one of the founders, one of the heads of Tavistock. And then his son, Alan Trist, goes to work with the Grateful Dead, you know, and of course the Grateful Dead were CIA. So, yeah, I mean, pick a path.
All right. So this is basically World War II. They've set up this idea of psychiatric mind control. Moving on, we get to Vietnam. So the hippies protested against this war. They thought they would stop it with peace and love and LSD, but they didn't. The war went on. And I'm not going to go through all of the statistics here, but let me just pull out some highlights. The Vietnam era, which is August the 5th, 1964 to May the 7th, 1975, there were just over 9 million military personnel on active duty in that time, and 2.7 million Americans served in Vietnam. So that's about 10% of their generation. That's pretty staggering to think of today. And but by the way, I'm calling this on the heading here, Vietnam, the Lost War, because we lost it. And this was a shock. The American military had won World War II resoundingly. We were the greatest military might on earth, and it was kind of inconceivable that we could be beaten by a bunch of guys running around the jungle. And so this was quite a setback. And in terms of troop losses, there were 58,000 deaths, which is it's very tragic, but in proportion to 2.7 million troops serving, it isn't really a mass. We didn't lose because all of our soldiers got killed, I guess is the point of that.
Right.
And in fact, even of the deaths, 10,800 non-hostile deaths. So what that means, non-hostile, is another way that the military says friendly fire. So, a lot of people were drafted, and then they were told, go to that village and wipe out all of the women and children there. And, some of them thought, you know what? Maybe instead of wiping out the women and children, I'm just going to shoot my sergeant giving me that order, and I'm going to shoot him in the back, and they're blaming on the enemy. And so there was a massive rise in instances of what they call fragging, officers being shot by their own men. And there was a massive amount of friendly fire. The military also came to the realization that the draft didn't really work, that you couldn't turn someone into a cold-blooded, brutal killer just by randomly picking them off the street. And but meanwhile, the people who were defending their home and their ancestry and heritage, they were cold-blooded, brutal killers, and they would not think twice about whatever they had to do to the women and children of the enemy if they encountered them. But in this case, there were very few women actually in Vietnam. I think was the stat there, 7,484 women in Vietnam, of which 6,250 were nurses. 20% of the servicemen got addicted to heroin. And, when you're talking about 2.7 million service people in Vietnam, this is just absolutely terrible. And you can't really look at the drug culture of the 60s in isolation from the Vietnam War, because this is all taking place in the Golden Triangle, where all of the opium and heroin is being produced. The heroin's coming back in the coffins of the dead soldiers, being smuggled in these body bags, and the soldiers themselves are getting addicted to heroin and coming back and ending up on the streets with a habit and victims of the drug culture. So the war had its military victims, it had its drug victims as well, and probably many more drug victims than military victims. It was also much worse for crippling wounds than previous wars, and we're seeing that as well today in Afghanistan and Iraq, that a lot of people are losing limbs compared to past warfare. But basically, at the end of the Vietnam War, when they talked to the public, they talked to the veterans, the majority agreed that we didn't lose the war because we couldn't have won it, because we didn't have the right weapons, or we weren't as powerful enough military. We lost the war because of political will. It was the psyops, and basically the psyops of the pacifists, the anti-war movement, that won the day in the United States. And so the will for the war went away. It couldn't be fought anymore, and America had to pull out. So this was a real wake-up for the military in the 70s. They lost the war. Their model of the draft wasn't going to work. Their soldiers weren't really operating that well on the battlefield. Morale was very low. What were they going to do? And fast forward a little bit now to 1994, and we're having a revolution in military affairs. So this is from the Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute, a paper by Stephen Metz and James Kiervit. It says, many American strategic thinkers believe that we're in the beginning stages of a historical revolution in military affairs. This will not only change the nature of warfare, but also alter the global geopolitical balance. The revolution is not only strategic, it is also fundamentally technological. Advances in sensors and other elements of information technology may bring great benefits to conventional combined arms warfare, but will have less impact in conflict short of war, which is most often won or lost through the manipulation of images, beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions. These things, rather than troop concentrations, command and control nodes, and transportation infrastructure, are the key military targets in conflict short of war. This makes psychological technology much more important than strike technology. Ways must be found to use emerging technology, including advanced artificial intelligence and information dissemination systems, to help military strategists develop, implement, and continually improve methods of influencing opinion, mobilizing public support, and sometimes demobilizing it. rather than being limited by constraints and countermeasures, there's another alternative. We could deliberately engineer a comprehensive revolution seeking utter transformation rather than simply an expeditious use of new technology. The future will most likely be dominated by new forms of spiritual insurgency designed to radically alter the ideological structure of regimes. So the revolution in military affairs is basically bringing in all of this electronic sensor technology into the cloud, into the grid, as we talked about last time. And then it's winning the hearts and minds through manipulating images, beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions. And they're
and that's what you see the whole MK Ultra New Age movement is across the United States. They've turned it on us.
Absolutely. How do they transform personalities, and what are they trying to transform them into? Well, that's the changing images of man that we talked about last week, and this is really about a war for ideology and for the very soul itself. A spiritual insurgency is a battle for the soul. This claim of the revolution in military affairs was kind of somewhat cynically commented on by a lady named Julia Ann McKinney. She's a former U.S. Army intelligence officer, and she's the director of the Electronic Surveillance Project of the Association of National Security Alumni. So she's kind of like a watch the watchers kind of person, a voice of reason in the intelligence community. So she described the revolution as satanic cults, UFO cults, directed energy technologies, neurocybernetics, psychotechnologies, biotechnologies, experimental drugs, multinational government contractors and subsidiaries, investment portfolios and other financial inducements, imported foreign national scientists, a controlled and compliant media, decentralized US government control, and an induced crime wave. And I think all of those things sort of, have happened in the last 20 years. And
absolutely,
many of them were already present in the MK Ultra sub-projects. And so that leads me to my thesis that, in 1975, when the Church Commission kind of exposed MK Ultra, Richard Helms burned a bunch of documents, and then Stansfield Turner stood up and said, we don't do anything like this anymore. We've shut it all down. Possibly the CIA did stop its MK Ultra research, but I think it's quite likely that many of those sub-projects shifted across to military intelligence. And, what changed between the depression and lack of morale at the end of the Vietnam War in 1974 and this revolution in military affairs in 1994 over that 20-year period? Well, I think there's two things. One is the New Age movement, the Aquarian conspiracy, and the other one is technology, the internet, the personal computer. And both of those things, coming from the military with this goal of psychological operations and control. So drilling down a bit more into this, the military warlocks and psychic spies, and you've had General Stubblebine on the show. That was a fantastic show. I recommend everybody watch that out. And General Stubblebine basically said that 9/11 woke him up, and he realized that it wasn't a plane that hit the Pentagon, and that he had been lied to for much of his career. And it would be great to get him back on the show and see if we can get any more information out of him.
Well, he did agree to come back on again, maybe in the last 6 or 8 months. So maybe I should follow up with him and see if he's still willing to do that. After he sees this, he may not be willing to,
Well,
I think he was working with the Esalen Institute and Jim Channon, etc. So
he's the boss. This is all his group on this page here. Pretty much everybody pictured directly reports to him, and if they don't, they indirectly report to him. And it's quite a fascinating story, and there is quite a lot of material about this on the internet. But basically, the military decided that there was something to telepathy, what they call remote viewing, which is psychics being able to describe locations without physically being there. They were looking at telekinesis, which is moving objects with the mind, Also pyrokinesis, which is setting fire to things simply through thought. There's the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, where they were trying to kill animals with the mind, and we'll get into that in a second. And they found out that the Russians had been doing quite a lot of research into this area and quite a lot of published academic papers that just hadn't been translated. And so the West decided that we better do some of this research for ourselves, but most of it was highly, highly classified and only has come to light in more recent years. But one of the one of the key projects that was involved with this remote viewing was operated by the DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was called Operation Grill Flame. So I think there we have another coincidence that we have coming out of the Presidio, these military warlocks and psychic spies trying to give people radical transformation, and the name of this project is, or one of them at least, is Grill Flame, like Burning Man. So I think we can perhaps chalk that one up.
Now, what do you think? Is it a double rap lie, like they're actually doing that research, or they want the public to believe in magic and that is the psyop?
Look, I think this stuff is real. I certainly quite frequently experience this, and I think many other people do as well. That I'll be talking about someone, and then the phone will ring, and it's them calling me.
Sure, but like our coincidence counter, I mean, is one coincidence just a coincidence, or is it, I mean, how do we verify, something like that when it's so minor?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we can leave it to one side if you want. But anyway, these guys are all tied up with SRI again. SRI is kind of the base for this kind of woo-woo parapsychology stuff. And a guy called Dr. Hal Puthoff is one of the key Stanford professors. He's at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and he's working on all of this stuff. He happens to be a Scientologist, as does that's Hal Puthoff, as does Ingo Swann, who's one of the most talented remote viewers. Then the guy bending the spoon is Uri Geller. I believe he may have been a Scientologist as well. So there's a lot of overlap between Scientology and the military's advanced parapsychological research. And we touched on the history of Scientology again last week, that L. Ron Hubbard was a disciple of Crowley, associating with Jack Parsons, doing all these occult rituals. He also, I believe, went to the St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the same one that Bear Owsley went to. And
also, Ezra Pound was locked up in MK Ultra there. And Uri Geller was on Red Ice Radio a couple years ago and admitted that he was both CIA and Mossad. And, of course, he worked under Dr. Andrea Puharich, who we know worked at the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland and was Army Intel and CIA working on MK Ultra.
Yeah. And these guys are going to the pyramids and the Sphinx with advanced ground penetrating radar. They've got robots with cameras on them. You probably all remember those Geraldo shows. We're about to open the chamber in the pyramid now, and the robots crawling through. Well, that's the guys from SRI that are going there with the robots, and they're also tied up with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Also investigating all of these types of phenomenon. A guy there called Colonel John Alexander. He's considered to be the father of non-lethal warfare. And this has been another part of the revolution in military affairs, is this concept that we don't need to kill people anymore. We can tase them. We can shoot incapacitating goo at them like Spider-Man, so they just freeze in place. And all these kind of other technologies, acoustic weapons, electronic fences. This one guy, John Alexander, was a real pioneer in spearheading for the army to produce that. And he was a member of this group called the Avery. His code name was Penguin. They all gave themselves bird-like names to be part of the Avery. And that was very tied up with UFO groups, and Lawrence Rockefeller was a big funder of all of this kind of stuff. So this is going on. This is the 70s. This is at Stanford, SRI, and the Presidio. These Psi warriors, these sorcerers. Excuse me. And then the Men Who Stare at Goats, fantastic book by John Ronson. The movie with Clooney is okay, as Clooney movies usually are. It's certainly fascinating that Clooney seems to make a great number of movies related to the CIA and intelligence projects. There's also another video documentary series I'd recommend by John Ronson called The Crazy Rulers of the World that really gets right into all of this stuff, and it's quite
that actually
fascinating.
became Men Who Stare at Goats, essentially. Yeah, that
Right,
and
yeah.
the book, both. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but there was a real guy that stared at or basically killed a goat without touching it from a distance, and that's the guy pictured there with a knife in his teeth. A guy called Michael Achanis. This guy sounds like one hardcore badass mofo, black belt ninja, and he was trained Army Special Forces. So I have a memo to the right of the screen there from SEAL Team 2, and it lists a lot of the type of activities that Achanis was training the forces in. And you'll see the very last item is actually mind control. So, there you have it on Navy SEAL paperwork that we train our soldiers in how to mind control their opponents. This guy, he died mysteriously. He seems to have been, much more to do with traditional martial arts. And in some branches of martial arts, they get into this pressure point killing, where if you touch certain organs or certain parts of the body in sequence, you can kill people with just a touch. And in some of the accounts I've heard of the goat being killed, it's possible he may have done something like that to a goat.
Now let me just interrupt and ask you something here about the goat theme, because a couple weeks ago I did a whole show on Pan and the goat and everything. It just seems really almost in your face, the additional goat theme with Men Who Stare at Goats and the scapegoat killing the goat, all of this stuff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think it's kind of a little strange. In my own research, the military tends to use monkeys and dogs more than they use goats for things. And, we have this bizarre pet cemetery at the Presidio. If they were doing psychic research trying to kill dogs, that's kind of a pretty miserable story. Perhaps a goat, it was felt that was more acceptable, or perhaps it was felt that a goat was more a cult for them to use in the story.
Whatever they tell the public about what animal it was is sort of, just the after story. I mean, we don't know what animals they really studied, except for what John Ronson is telling us.
Yeah, and even he's going from some of the soldiers from the previous page who are relaying a story that someone else told them, what I
right,
mean?
And I wondered, reading some of John Ronson's work, if he was British counterintelligence. It sure seems like it, reading his work.
Yeah, well, if you look at the when Alex Jones goes to Bohemian Grove, that's actually with John Ronson, and look at the original footage of that day, and there's some kind of weird stuff in there. I don't know. Anyway, I really like the guy. I really like Crazy Rulers of the World. I like his books.
Sure.
And I think that, to me, just because someone is an agent or works for the CIA, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person.
Well, no, but you just have to be careful of the story that they're presenting. And again, it goes back to Spies in Academic Clothing, using that 70-30 thing and putting out some truth, but then spinning it so that the intelligence community, as they always want to do, control the entire conversation.
Yeah, and perhaps that's where the psyop of this comes in, that they with Project Jedi, they wanted other soldiers around the world afraid that America had these Jedi warriors that could just kill them with their mind. Because
I think
that
that's
on Star Wars and Men Who Stare at Goats.
And I think that is the psyop. I mean, getting back to the trivia method, and when we're consistent with reality, we can deduce that, using the trivium method, that it's very likely that part of the PSYOP is getting people to believe that they can do this, whether it's the enemy or the general public.
Yep, definitely. And there could very well be multiple objectives at once with a lot of this stuff.
Well, sure, yeah, definitely.
So, moving on from the goats then, and let's get into Task Force Delta. So, at the opening, we had the Presidio is this triangle, is this Delta, and many of the PSYOP people working out of the Presidio were members of this 130-person army think tank. And what they were studying was the process of influencing people, the process of control, the dynamics of change, the nature of interdependence, the science of systems, and the dynamics of force readiness. So it's basically looking at how, what is the army trying to do? It's trying to, make people follow it. How do you do that? Well, you influence them. And, influenced by force is the old army. The revolution in military affairs is how else can we control change and process them? So this is a quote from Jim Channon. And he's basically presenting these concepts that he's learned at Esalen to this army think tank. Task Force Delta's effort needs the track of time. Just as we maintain our perspective of the past and contact with complexities of the present, our 1st Earth Battalion is the prime place to put thoughts of the future through a basic army perspective. So this is like the future of the army. This is it, the 1st Earth Battalion. The 1st Earth Battalion is not mission-oriented, it is potential-oriented. That means we shall continue to look everywhere to find non-destructive methods of control. JFC Fuller, the father of mechanized warfare, was an omnidirectional thinker and a member of the world of the occult. Be a guerrilla guru. Explore the occult, the New Age, the traditional Eastern philosophy, and space-age technology. So JFC Fuller, who did indeed invent tank warfare, he's the guy who came up with what the Germans called Blitzkrieg, basically storming the French defenses with a huge amount of tanks on the march. And he was a disciple of Crowley, quite probably a lover of Crowley. They were certainly very close. And this is who Jim Channon says for the army, this is the future of warfare, the occult. Aleister Crowley.
Sure. Well, and if you go back to Hassani Sabah, Aleister Crowley, Emanuel Swedenborg, etc., they're all agents. They're all involved in espionage. They're all doing all this stuff. There's a great book that, in fact, you got for me that goes into Swedenborg's whole history as an agent and all of this. So all of these guys, all of the occult, the New Age, all of this stuff that Channon is recommending here, that is the intelligence community. That's the foundation of it. Just like you and I were discussing in part one, that the intel community and the occult is the same thing.
Absolutely. And then you have this group out on the fringes of the military intelligence community who are doing this parapsychology research, and it's as close to magic as you can get, I think, for the human experience.
Right.
I got a little quote down there as well. So the 1st Earth Battalion Operations Manual was funded by the Pacific Institute, and the founder of the Pacific Institute, a guy called Lou Tice, once said, "I am a wizard and have godlike powers." So this is the kind of speeches these guys go around making. I guess if you've got the CIA's checkbook, you probably do feel like you have godlike powers.
Yeah. Well,
I bet Watson didn't have to think about his budget when he bought his martinis at the Century Club.
No, definitely not. They get a lot of Marshall Fund candy, as they say. Marshall Plan candy. Sorry, go ahead.
I bet. Just to finish on this slide, at the bottom right of the screen there is a little diagram of a little bunch of tanks, a little bunch of armored personnel carriers. This is drawn by Jim Channon, who I think actually has an art degree. But this was pretty revolutionary thinking in 1978. when you looked at a computer screen for the military, you saw a bunch of codes and symbols. And the soldiers had to be trained to translate the codes and symbols to what does that mean. Well, Shannon was like, why don't you just put a picture of a tank? That's a tank. That's a battleship. That's an armored personnel carrier. That's a helicopter. Put that on the screen, and then the generals can understand what's going on better. And this was like a light bulb going on kind of moment for them in the day. Like, oh, wow, let's do it. We sort of take that stuff for granted today. So the 1st Earth Battalion has actually been likened to Burning Man, funnily enough. And this is a fantastic article in PS Mag. It's called The Merry Pranksters Who Hacked the Afghan War. It's actually Pacific Standard Magazine by Brian Colvert. And so he's talking about a guy called Dave Warner, who's created a group called the Synergy Strike Force. And he said, where Shannon's 1st Earth Battalion had dredged the New Age zeitgeist for military insights, the Synergy Strike Force was drawing from today's answer to the human potential movement. The technology-soaked, DIY-happy, crowdsource everything ethos of Burning Man and the more exuberant corners of Silicon Valley. And we actually have a couple of the Synergy Strike Force mission patches here that these soldiers are wearing on duty in Afghanistan that have a picture of the Burning Man symbol, the Burning Man Black Rock City layout, the Pentagon that happens in. And this guy, Dave Warner, is running a burner bar in Afghanistan. All the people in his team that are working for him are burners. And so they've basically taken this philosophy that, hey, Jim Channon came in the 70s with the 1st Earth Battalion. He went to Esalen and then told the military what to do. Well, we go to Burning Man, we should be telling the military what to do. And it looks like that's still working today.
Wow.
So here's Jim Channon. And he's actually the guy who came up with the phrase for the army, be all you can be. So the philosophy behind this phrase is very much the human potential philosophy. It's not shoot people or kill all you can kill. You know what I mean? It's join the army because we're going to train you and discipline you to be the best version of yourself. And, I actually think that's very good. That's positive. That's the sort of stuff we definitely should be training our military with. Channon considers himself to be a social architect, which means that he designs spaces with color, music, motion, and a sense of play in order to change people's minds.
Temporary autonomous zones.
Exactly. And in fact, I have a clip of that. Let's go to that.
I'm Jim Channon. Call myself a social architect. One of the things social architects do is they design spaces so that people can have a bigger sense of life force, actually an experience. There is data, then information, then knowledge, then wisdom, then experience, then maybe rapture, where we're looking at the highly charged experience you can get when you bring a group of people together in full play, with music, with color, with motion.
So as you can see there, what they're trying to do is create these spaces with music and light, and socially engineering the interactions between people with the context for those interactions being play. And in that sense, what he's talking about, it really sounds exactly like the acid tests. That was maybe a quite early version of it, but it sort of begs the question, if Jim Channon's running around designing these spaces, social engineering these spaces for play, well where's he doing that? Is this the Iraq and Syria battlefield? Is it an army training facility? Or is it maybe a popular festival?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to Homo Ludens, the Plane Man, by Johann Huizinga.
Right. And then even you pointed me to a link that came from your interview with Alan Piper about the dervish culture in the 1200s, that these people would just roam the streets in odd, strange clothes and acting bizarrely. And, the court jester kind of has evolved from the image that these people created, but was almost a religion to them. And with, I believe, hallucinogenic drugs involved as well. So this guy, Shannon, he considered himself a military warlock, and as well as working for Army intelligence, he was a consultant to large corporations. And in fact, he says that Fortune magazine called him the world's first shaman consultant. But I found the actual article of Fortune, and in it, Jim Shannon is saying, I am a shaman consultant. So he's not really being called that by Fortune. He's calling himself that. But, I guess this is part of the Aquarian conspiracy, is these big corporations need to get shaman consultants.
Right. Well, Steve, you're not supposed to go and check the primary citations. You're just supposed to believe what these guys say, because every time you check the citations, their whole house of cards falls apart.
Exactly. Jim Shannon was also a member of the Temple of Set, created by Lieutenant Colonel Aquino. And, he was working with Willis Harman, Changing Images of Man, SRI. The first Earth Battalion handbook that he created, he said that was inspired by Stuart Brand's Whole Earth catalogue, which was kind of the hippie Bible of the 60s. This guy also created this cartoon character called Captain Planet. And if you look at the Wikipedia page, it says that Captain Planet was created by Ted Turner and a eugenicist named Barbara Pyle from the Phi Beta Kappa fraternity. But Shannon actually did have quite a big role in it. So he created the storyline and the backstory of the characters, and named the characters, including one called Duke Nukem that became a famous computer game. And, it features 5 kids, 5 planets, 5 rings, 5 names, and 5 elements. And, of course, we get the Pentagon of the 5, popular satanic number. And somehow this kids' TV cartoon show managed to get an unbelievable A-list group of stars making guest appearances. Bob Weir from The Grateful Dead and Bohemian Grove. Sting, Morgan Freeman, Whoopi Goldberg, Jeff Goldblum, Meg Ryan, Martin Sheen, Dean Stockwell, James Coburn, John Ratzenberger from Cheers, Ed Asner, Helen Hunt, who had a bit of a mental flip-out alien visitation, if I remember right. I think that was her. Tim Curry and Malcolm McDowell. And that's just some of the big-name stars. I mean, I could have filled up the whole slide with the names, but those ones in particular to me have always seemed a little bit maybe intelligence connected. But this was the #1 syndicated animated show teaching kids about the environment. And Shannon's got a quote here from his Facebook page. He says, "When I look at the original and think how far ahead of its time it was, makes me proud. Consummate, wholesome. Those kids are now in middle management. Wait till they're in charge." So to me, that's an indication that Army intelligence is planning a multi-generational psyop using cartoons to deliver messages to kids. But the idea is probably as the kids get older, the messages keep getting delivered and reinforced, but in a different medium.
Absolutely.
And it kind of shows, how deep this thing goes, that these guys were making this TV show in 1990 with their eye on the kids being in middle management when they're in their 50s and 60s down the track. The other thing about Lieutenant Colonel Shannon is he lives in this utopia, temporary autonomous zone style community out in Hawaii. 17 people there together, and it's all about free love. He talks about that himself in his videos. There's a lot of weird kind of stuff going on with these people, but it looks like a pretty nice place from YouTube. This is what Shannon had to say about Burning Man. What do you know? The guy that creates spaces with lights and music for full play has some opinions on Burning Man. He says, The people are neons, the edgy folk who want to get away from the old world, dying of clustered protocols and tired manners. Sacred cows don't come to Burning Man. They'd be systematically slain and ground into plier dust. Old programs are absorbed naturally by plier dust. This is about what's next. It's disorienting at the perfect level because most present-day reality is pretty well postponed or just driven over here by a more expanded range of radically new things, like extremely gentle manners, roving mechanical mood bots, and millions of glow-in-the-dark neons that go tickle in the night. It doesn't matter that you have clothes on or don't have clothes on publicly. Most people do, but the range of apparel is from extreme to, well, whatever. Almost a fourth of the bicycles have fur on them, and strangely enough, it's mostly pink. Didn't see a biker or a derelict. It's the breadth of the choices everywhere that boggles and finally washes the mind away. The subject matter is unlimited. New meaning arrives 3 times a second, and consequences for any of it may never exist. It leaves one breathlessly open to possibility. There are previews of coming worlds here and erasures of older ones. Lots of compost of what was. This event is the pilgrimage for the itchy techno-tribal world of planet Earth. The most elite of our global change agents are having their annual bath in the sacred new gifts of creation. And if you haven't been to Burning Man and you're not familiar with the way the Burning Man organization talks, this might seem a little over the top, but this is kind of common speak. The burners really do see this, not just changing their world, but this is the pinnacle of human civilization, and the best and greatest of all humanity is here for their annual bath in the sacred gifts of creation. Anyway, this is the Army intelligence guy telling us about Burning Man. But let's head back a little bit to the early days. Jim Channon, he's made his pitch to the Task Force Delta think tank. They've created the First Earth Battalion, and he's created the First Earth Battalion handbook to try to sell his ideas to the Army. And it's really quite fascinating to drill into these ideas, I think. So here we are in 1982. So now we're going to have a look at this warrior network and basically how the ideas of Jim Channon merged with the internet to become the World Wide Web. So here we have a primary function of the First Earth is to communicate ideas. Set up a network of information within your army and with friends in any army. Soon continental coordinators will emerge, and then we will consider communications media other than the mail and telephone. Let this battalion grow wherever there is interest. So this is in 1982, and what he's describing to the top brass of the army is basically that soon we're going to have a new means of communication as well as what we have today, the phone and the mail. The next slide here is he's over 1,000 warriors and warriors' friends share a network of ideas and transformational schemes. The First Earth Battalion is structured as an information network. So the name of this network is actually DeltaNet, and he's sketched a drawing there which shows the nodes of DeltaNet, and I've inlaid on that a map of ARPANET in 1982. And it's very similar. So basically, these guys have access to ARPANET, which is the early internet that's been developed by the Pentagon. And it's a bunch of nerds and deadheads that are doing the actual coding. Either he's running into them at a Grateful Dead concert or at Esalen or wherever else he's moving in the New Age circles and finding out about this technology, and was obviously a very early adopter. So basically, you have 1,000 of these warriors and warrior monks operating on the very early internet. So I'm sort of moving left, right. Now I'm down to the bottom left slide. The network. So phase 1, locate, address, categorize the community organizations in your region. Have a way to call or communicate with each. Phase 2, determine the kinds of service that each can perform. Some groups may only be able to meditate on an idea. Others may be able to pack up and work on a damn project out of town for a week. Get the categories clarified. Use the network, phase 3, use the network to share information of importance to the community. Phase 4, activate grand networks with regional tasks of interest to all. Do this on Friday. Should a serious problem like an earthquake or financial crash affect your region, this kind of community cohesion would drastically reduce the chaos and generate the structure for recovery. A national operations center for world networking awaits major funding. So you got to sort of look at where the world was at this point of time in 1982. The idea that there should be an internet was not an accepted idea. The military did have this network, but it was highly secure, and there was a great amount of resistance to the idea of bringing that out to the public world and making it available to the public. They didn't want to let insecure people inside their networks. They didn't want to let hackers in, for example, or enemies to get in. So Shannon is kind of pushing back against this, and he's trying to come up with how do we sell to the top brass this idea that is going to get them to greenlight the internet project. And so he said, well, looking at environmental disasters and earthquakes and things like that, we could use this network to draw people together to collaborate, as long as we had different people in different regions that could come together. And then he has a map of this concept. And the reason that this particular slide is yellow and the other ones are white is that you can get most of this First Earth Battalion stuff on the web pretty readily for free for download. I think I have the links in the notes. The yellow one is actually from the book. And so for some reason, this particular page didn't make it into the online copy of the book. It's only there in the physical hard copy of the book. And it's quite fascinating to me because he's laid down a timeline for what they're going to do between 1982 and 1986. He said, making a dream for warriors come true is much like change anywhere. The more detailed and thought out the concept, the greater its chances for success. Here is the closest outline of a much more detailed plan for the Earth Battalion concept to unfold. And the plan is basically in 1982, the doctrine plans are complete. And I guess that's what he's writing here, the doctrine plans. The masters are located. Who's the team we need that's going to come and make this happen? And then the cadre is organized, the ethics and the ritual is designed. That's in 1983. And the beginning of the design of the soft tactics, whatever that is. In 1984, the command central opens, recruitment begins, and the international link-up begins. In 1985, the academy opens, and in 1986, the Earth Battalions form. The first Earth Battalion forms, and planetary action begins. Now, we're going to have a look at what actually happened in 84 and 86, and we're going to relate it back to this slide. But, it turns out that this slide was incredibly prescient, and things kind of did happen exactly to this timeline that Shannon had outlined there. So, 1984, Orwell studied under Huxley and under H.G. Wells. He went to Eton, super elite private school. And then he was employed by Lord David Astor, the Astor family, another big opium smuggling family. And Lord Astor had a private island in Scotland. And he said to George Orwell, hey, why don't you go live in my private island for 2 years and write 1984? As you do, as one does. And the reason that Orwell chose 1984, he was always going to set the book really in 2000. That was what was in his mind. But 1984 is the 100th anniversary of the Fabian Society. And he was a member, and basically the plans of the Fabian Society was to move us towards this kind of Orwellian Brave New World, one step at a time, so that people wouldn't really notice what was being done to them until it was too late.
Exactly.
And, the book turned out to be incredibly prescient. But let's have a look at what else happened in 1984. So the first thing is that the military starts to make the preparations to release the internet. The internet's been developed out of DARPA and the Pentagon for the last 20 or so years. I guess 15 years at the point, 1984. And so they decide that the way they are going to release it is they're going to separate MilNet, the military internet, from the civilian internet. And that's still the architecture that they have today. They also decided to make TCP/IP, the standard for the internet. And so this was really like a key decision for the birth of the net. Without the standard, the internet couldn't have happened. And significantly, the first international organization that agreed to adopt TCP/IP internally was CERN, the Particle Physics Accelerator in Switzerland. And their name keeps coming up in this again and again and again. The other thing that happened in 1984 is that the plan was hatched to create what became the WELL, the Whole Earth Electronic Link. And this is from the team that brought you the Whole Earth Catalogue and the Whole Earth Review, i.e. Army Ranger, Pentagon photographer, Stuart Brand, Grateful Dead cinematographer, creator of it all. He comes up with this thing as well, the World Wide Web. And he comes up with the plan for it with the Grateful Dead's doctor, a guy called Larry Brilliant. And the Grateful Dead's doctor just happens to have this code from the University of Michigan, which is called PicoSpan, and it's code for online discussion forums. So it basically enables them to create the WELL, which is the precursor of the World Wide Web. And they came up with this plan at the Western Behavioral Sciences Institute conference in La Jolla. So basically, the network itself, it had a lot of potential. It could do stuff, but without content, there wasn't much to do. And in order to get the content into the network, they had to get interesting personalities and content creators involved. And so that's what this WELL was about. How do we get this network of cyberspace thought leaders to come and create the first virtual community? So Larry Brilliant supplied the code, Stuart Brand supplied the people, and this is, he throws this first hacker conference at Fort Cronkite. We saw that in the opening slide there, quite close to the Presidio, and he's brought all the cool people along. We've also seen these amazing books launched in 1984 that really set the tone for this image of man culture, the new image of man being the cyberpunk, and also even the nerd. Revenge of the Nerds, it actually came out at the end of 1983, but that's close enough. We'll claim that to 1984. And I was about, 12 or 13 when that movie came to New Zealand. I was a nerd. And the idea, the idea that, all the beautiful girls that wanted to go with the jocks, that the nerds could get those beautiful girls instead, that was like a fairy tale to me, there was no way that had ever happened. But I grew up into a world where suddenly that is the cool kids of today, certainly in the Bay Area, are these .com people, and it's hip to be square. They even made a song. That song probably came out in 1984 as well. Thinking about it now.
That's funny. You'll have to send me a photo of yourself from 1984 for this.
Or not.
So, come on. All right, go ahead.
Also in 1984, William Gibson's novel Neuromancer was published, and this is where we first get the word cyberspace. So it's 1984 is the birth of cyberspace. The concepts that became the movie The Matrix are pretty well discussed in Neuromancer. It's big on transhumanism and designer drugs. I mean, that was a radical concept in 1984. Designer drugs are probably fairly easy to get in San Francisco these days. He also had Stephen Levy, The Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. That was published in 1984. And the Hacking Magazine, 2600 magazine, the editor of that, it's called Emmanuel Goldstein, which in the novel 1984 is the leader of the terrorists, is Goldstein. So all of this hacker stuff comes out at really the same time. Oh, and the other thing is the movie War Games, which is about, a teenage kid who hacks into the Pentagon and almost starts World War III. And so basically a great business case for cybersecurity contained in that War Games movie. The other thing they did in 1984 is they had the first ever TED conference. So, fitting the plan to how do we get the people together that are going to drive content to this new online realm? Well, we'll have a new type of conference and we'll invite the best and brightest from the design world to come, and maybe the reviews of what they talk about will create content in cyberspace. And then and just at the end of 84, basically March 1985, they launched the Well down in Sausalito. There's a whole bunch of nice houseboats down there. And, most of the initial content is related to the Grateful Dead. Probably not surprising since the code for it's come from the Grateful Dead. And Deadheads built the internet. But at this point, at the end of 1984, they're ready with their plan. They want to go live with the internet. They've figured out that they need to get content. They've built the Well to go and get the content. So the next thing that's on is the search begins for globally scalable activities of interest to intelligentsia and intelligence, which was suited to online organizing and the creation of communities. So no one's sitting there saying, gee, we can organize a great cheer squad for the LA Lakers with all this technology. No, they want academics, they want engineers, they want the smartest people, they want people that are of interest to the intelligence agencies. And they're starting to look for what sort of activities are there, what sort of groups are out there that would benefit from an electronic means of getting together to organize activities. Which then brings us to 1986. And 1986 is kind of the birth of everything in this story. It's the birth of Burning Man, but it's the birth of the internet as well. So the first meeting of the Internet Engineering Task Force is January 86. Now, that's actually the fourth meeting of this group. The previous three meetings were classified military projects. So nobody knew what the meeting was about. The minutes weren't made public, things like that. And this pattern seems to come up quite a bit, that they meet three times in the classified meetings, and then they have a fourth, more public meeting, which is considered to be the first meeting of the group. And the Internet Engineering Task Force, that's still the ruling body of the internet today. They launched NSF-Net, which is the internet backbone based on TCP/IP, and that's the foundation of the modern internet we have today. So the 6 nodes that were originally in that backbone, they had a connection between them of 56K a second across the whole country. Incredibly slow, and I don't believe those nodes are on the internet anymore, but the sites where they were located will have more powerful computers. In 1986, the Well said, hey, maybe we should have another hacker conference. Stuart Brown organizes it again, and this is where John Perry Barlow shows up and joins the Well. 1986 is also where the first ever troll appears. The population of cyberspace grew to about 500 before they got their first troll. And the name of the troll was Mark Ethan Smith. It turned out to be a woman from Berkeley. A guy called David Gans had a radio show on KFOG called the Deadhead Hour every week for Grateful Dead fans, and he was heavily promoting the Well. And so because of that, the Well ended up a third to maybe even a half of all of the activity on this group was related to the Grateful Dead. By the end of 1987, population had grown from 500 people to 2,000 people, mostly deadheads. They were doing these occult experiments with well beams. So they, for example, if someone was recovering in a hospital, they would organize to get together at a certain time using the well, and then they would send prayer or good thought or these well beams to the person to see if they got better. And it worked. There are accounts that worked, and I think that there have been other studies around the world that show there's something to that type of stuff. But the challenge that they had with the Well is to grow past this 2000, all right, they've got these deadheads that write code in Silicon Valley, but how do they get the whole world involved in this thing? So the challenge was to find people to populate cyberspace with interesting content aligned with the counterculture and social engineering objectives. And to that end, we see the foundation of a bunch of groups in 1986 that seem very aligned to counterculture and social engineering objectives. Burning Man, the Cacophony Society, which is modeled on the earlier Suicide Club. It's basically the first idea of a social network. These people get together just for the sake of getting together. and it's for those outside of the mainstream. So they're deliberately targeting the fringes, people that maybe don't have such solid and strong family and religious connections. Also, in around about 1986, you can split hairs about it, but this is when we see the global rave scene emerging. And we also see a whole bunch of things ended. So the Stonehenge Free Festival basically had run from the 60s and had become a symbol and icon of the 60s. But that was shut down in 1985. The Billboard Liberation Front, which was a San Francisco group that spun out of the Suicide Club, that went dark for a number of years. They'd been very, very active, but all of a sudden they just stopped doing anything, possibly because they were caught up with founding these other new groups. And then we also see a reshuffling of the occult power structure. So the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, this is basically, one of the things that looks like Crowley did in his time in the States and when he ended up on Esopus Island was reorganizing the Illuminati into a number of different network structures, with the OTO being the head structure of it. It went through a number of different battles for ownership and some lawsuits. The lawsuits were finally settled, and a guy called Grady McMurtry ended up as the head of the OTO, but then he died shortly thereafter. And the other occult power structure of Scientology that was tied up with the OTO and Crowley back in Hubbard's earlier days, L. Ron Hubbard dies at the beginning of 1986 as well. So into this occult power vacuum comes this brand new occult ritual, Burning Man, which in many ways, when we look at how it's evolved, you can see a lot of the similarities between Burning Man and the festivals that they used to have at Stonehenge. And between those and the global rave scene as well, all kind of coming at the same time.
And toss in some Wicker Man along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Then the Wicker Man. Okay, so benevolent commando projects. He's described in here this concept of benevolent commando raids. Conducting high consciousness commando raids may be confusing to some, so here's an example. And he goes through an example where basically you create a conspiracy of sparkling eyes. You get your team together and you call up some DJs in town, report that that people's eyes are changing and somehow beginning to sparkle. And if you stare deeply into someone's eyes, you can see an inner light. And the idea you're trying to spread is that people will spend more time looking into each other's eyes. And so then the same people call the station 2 weeks later and they say, hey, that sparkly eyes thing, we tried it and it's amazing. It really does work, And pretty soon everyone all over town will be gazing into each other's eyes to see if they have sparkly eyes. I mean, this is crazy, right? But they're pitching this at the Army War College to these think tanks. This is the future of the Army. And they want to have these benevolent commando raids where the radio is the people's friend. So the idea is we're not soldiers anymore going to kill. We come in peace, and we're only trying to win over your hearts and minds. With the network being the key to that. The slide at the top left there is talking about Alpha Force, Beta Force, Gamma Force, and Delta Force. At the time of this, there wasn't a Delta Force as there is today, so it may well have actually come out of that, because if you look at the things attached to it, it's the Academy, the International Team, Hostage Intervention, Terrorist Intervention. That's the sort of things that Delta Force probably would do for the Army today. On the other side, we have the National Guard, Bio-Rescue and Eco-Rescue, and the Evolutionary Vanguard. And they're doing a whole bunch of different projects. So in 1985, they do the Wildlife Waterways Project. 1986, Connections, a national TV project. 87, Music in the Wind Project. 88, Cosmoculture Project. 89, Good Works Project. 1990, Artists in Action Project. And the Army Reserve will catalyze its major projects as the Beta Force. So they're seeing the Army Reserve, which, as we already saw, is masquerading as bus drivers and lawyers and things like that. Seeming to be civilians catalyzing the projects, not completely doing the projects themselves, catalyzing them. Civilians do the projects as well. We see the concept of radical self-expression in the First Earth Battalion, and the idea was that soldiers would show up to a village bringing a baby lamb and some flowers, and they would be playing indigenous music, and so the locals would know that they come in peace, and so they wouldn't set any IEDs for them to drive over or anything like that. I mean, it seems a little bit too new age to me, but I guess these ideas caught on. One of them that I think is relevant to burners is if you look at the bottom right, this uniforms without uniformity. It says, we foster individuality and celebrate the way all humans are unique. Costuming is becoming the prerogative of the individual. A culture will emerge that has all the richness of tribal culture with the function required of high tech. The individual will shine through the uniformity. So they're envisaging this culture emerging, just like changing images of man. Transformation engine. This is some words that would be very familiar to burners as well. Basically, he's saying that if we look at the slide on the top right first, where it says stripping away structure, the warrior is always on the path. The path is out of the cultural trance and into enlightenment. So that's what they're selling here. Get out of your trance, get into enlightenment. How do you do it? Well, one of the grandest moments in personal development training is watching people pop out of the jelly. They caught it all their lives in a set of belief systems that have blocked them from realizing that we are all one family. Often a zeroing experience like warfare, or a truly loving group of friends that causes people to realize they are connected to all of those around them in a deep and profound way. This is the planet's newest spectator sport, consciousness work. So here is the peddling the whole message again. Joe Atwill put it very well the other day, talking about when everything is one, we're all one in the zero, and when everything is one, you get zero. And the 1 and 0 is even represented in that First Earth Battalion logo on each slide there. But they're looking at cultural evolution, a personal evolution, organizational evolution, and transformation. How do we transform the warrior into being something else? And these ideas are very much at play at Burning Man today, and I have a clip for that.
What is it about Burning Man? What is it that transforms people? It's really an interesting question. So you want to know the secret of Burning Man. When we come to consciousness, we're born and we're raised in a society, a surrounding, and it has this reality around it that we're so used to. It's everything from the infrastructure to the social systems to all of the dynamics that make up who we are. And really what that is this kind of a box that holds us into place. At Burning Man, we've found a way to break out of that box. And what we do literally is take people's reality and we break it apart. Burning Man is a transformation engine. It has hardware and it has software. And you can adjust it and tweak it. And we've done that. We take people out to this vast, dry place, nowhere, very harsh conditions. And it strips away their luggage, the things that they have brought with them, the idea of who they thought they were. And it puts them in a community setting where they have to connect with each other. It puts them in this place where anything is possible. And in doing so, it breaks the old reality and it enables them to realize that you can create your own reality. You can do anything. If you get together with your community around you, you can create. And that's what Burning Man does. It's a transformational experience that enables people to think of anything.
Shannon has laid out a plan for in the future how the 1st Earth Battalion will evolve from the warrior monk network that they're beginning with to the technology for conscious warriors. And then the Natural Guard comes alive. The International Rescue Force lives. The Evolutionary Vanguard lives. And then the Terranauts inhabit space. And it says that the Earth Battalion and its children will spawn an endless evolutionary stream of service-oriented groups. The network exists, the technology is being refined, and detailed plans for the forces are being drawn up. So their plan is to evolve the warrior monk network, build some technology for it, go out and like fix problems around the earth like in natural disasters, then have like a global coordinated international rescue force, and then look at basically bringing the whole world's culture together on the back of that rescue force, and finally going out to inhabit space. And if we were to apply this to what actually happened since Shannon made that presentation, with Burning Man kind of being the frontier of the tech industry, you can see that the Warrior Monk Network is Burning Man and the Cacophony Society. The technology for conscious warriors, well, that's Google. That's what Esalen doing, giving them their human potential technology. The Natural Guard coming alive can be very much related to Burning Man's regional network, which started around about 97, 98. And then the International Rescue Force lives. Burning Man has a group, Burners Without Borders, that started with the Hurricane Katrina. And they actually go out around the world when there is a disaster, and they try to help recover from it. And then what they're talking about with the Evolutionary Vanguard, that's kind of where we're at today. The Maker movement is very intertwined with Burning Man in the Bay Area. And finally, the Terranauts inhabiting space. We have two burners driving the two initiatives to do that in Elon Musk with SpaceX and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin. So the concept of the First Earth Battalions forming in 1986 and then the Cacophony Society and the Burning Man group being manifestations of these ideas, it does fit Shannon's plan. And if you follow Shannon's plan, what happened in the future, that also fits, which I think is...
Steve, let me interrupt you. Are you in full screen again?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, we missed the last... I'm just going to have to edit them in. We missed the last couple slides.
Okay, so to move on from this slide, you'll notice that I've highlighted the International Rescue Force lives. And those words really struck me, International Rescue. Now, I don't know if you remember this, Jana, or people in the audience do. You remember this?
Yeah, of course.
Now, is that... I mean, because I've felt a lot of people in the States...
I should have said, fuck yeah.
Yeah, so people know Team America, World Police. America, fuck yeah. But it was based on an earlier TV show from the 60s called Thunderbirds. And in England, Australia, New Zealand, this show Thunderbirds is very well known. And that's what I guess Team America was based on. But again, maybe to some of the younger audience watching this, they've probably only ever seen Team America and they don't know about this earlier show. But the idea was basically there's this wealthy billionaire and he lives on this private island. And he's got 5 sons. And they together they form this International Rescue Force. That's the name of it, International Rescue. And if a disaster happens in the world, his island secretly transforms and the swimming pool drains and slides back and a spaceship takes out of it. And the mountain bursts open and another spaceship comes out of it. And they have this one spaceship called Thunderbird 2. It's the green one on the left. And you can see underneath it, it says the game of international rescue. And it's basically has this pod in the middle of it. And out of the pod is a little yellow vehicle coming. So this Thunderbird thing flies in, and then out of its cargo pod, other smaller craft come to perform mission-specific tasks. And so this is a puppet show in the 1960s. Now,
literally.
Yeah. Moving on to today, here's a bit of a more detailed look at Thunderbird 2 in the green, an International Rescue. And over there on the right is the Ernakov, a PAK-TA supersonic cargo aircraft. Russia has actually just started building this thing now. It features rapid deployment, mission-specific pods, and it's going to be the world's largest stealth aircraft. Now, I don't know. Maybe I just want to believe because I loved the show when I was a kid, but to me, that looks like this just about the same spaceship. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
It's got these big intake ducts. It's got this shape, and then it's got this modular cargo pods coming from the inside. Now, going to the bottom left of the screen there, and there's a couple of tracked. They look like autonomous vehicles that are coming out of the Thunderbird 2 and driving along the ground. And there's a vehicle with wheels on the right that has a whole bunch of pipes next to it. Well, I've overlaid to that image actual UAVs today. One of them's got the pipes, one of them's got the tracks, one of them's got the 6 wheels, whatever the type of acoustic weaponry or thing is mounted on the top, they have those as well. So how this kid's TV show in 1964 and today it's 2016 and these things are real and under production. How did they know that? Is it predictive programming? Is it the blurry line between science fiction and classified research projects? Or is there something to this occult? Are they channeling interdimensional entities? Are they communicating with the future? Or is there some secret hidden Nazi base in Antarctica that's all this stuff comes from? I don't know, but I find this a hell of a big coincidence.
Ding, ding.
So we didn't get as many slides done as I wanted to. We'll just have to do the next part in another part. But thanks very much, everyone, and look forward to the next one again.
And thanks so much, Steve, for coming back for part 2. Much appreciated. And we'll get this one out in part 3 as soon as we can, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.